around figure transformations and continuing off of kind of the hip exercises and the hip loosening with the percussion gun. So I noticed that, you know, now my gastrod's kind of pulling really tight and hard because my hamstring is really tight as well. And again, as this hip gets back sitting in the proper position, I too have to lengthen the hamstring. So all too often we got to think of the system as a whole, or the body as a whole. So if my hip gets off place, then my hamstring tightens, my quadriceps tightens, my adductors tighten, my calf tightens. So we got this kind of domino effect that happens through our body. And this was what was leading me for years to not understand kind of what was happening with my hip. And everybody out there was saying strengthen, strengthen, strengthen. And being a personal trainer for years, I'm thinking, okay, that's the best way to do it. Not realizing my glute was just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. Some of that had to do with my left hip tightness, you know, and that's what we got to understand more, especially when we're having an issue on one side of the body. What role is the other hip playing? But now that I get this hip back into a better position, I'm going to kind of hinge over, if you will, and I've done that hamstring. And I want to work it all the way up to the kind of insertion spot, if you will. And maybe I kind of check a little bit more too. Oh yeah, I can feel it loosening now almost instantaneously. So I got a little bit of my weight forward. Now I know this is going to take me a little while to fix my right hip because of years that it took me to get it this way. But the good news is it's not going to take me nearly as long to fix it as it did for me to get there. You know, so I'm 42 at this point, and you know, I'd say this thing's been going on for a good 15, maybe 20 years, and I've already made huge strides and improvements once I understood what was happening. And I hear this kind of complaint a lot, or notice it a lot on different forums, Reddit and whatnot, talking about hamstring tightness and your hamstrings always being tight, and then everybody seeming to think, well, you got to strengthen your glutes. If you got to think about it, your glute goes over your hamstring. So if your hip is out of alignment or too tight or pulled out, and also depending on our posture, maybe I'm standing like this, maybe I'm standing like this. If I'm standing like this, I got to lengthen it. Now, same thing too here. Sometimes now I'm kind of got my hamstring in a elongated position, but it also depends on where the hip sits. And so, you know, we got to look at everything and kind of all movement patterns when we're starting to understand what somebody needs to do. Now we can go off of feeling, but the hard part is too is to figure out what exercises are going to promote the best for this. So I did a lot of like one-legged exercises for years thinking that's what I needed to do, and I realized that it was kind of throwing me off more and more. I was thinking I was going to get more and more balance, but instead my right leg kept taking bad angles and my left leg kept taking good angles. And probably what I might have maybe needed to do more of is kind of rotational exercises, but the opposite of what I do. So I started taking martial arts, and a lot of martial arts is left foot forward, internally rotating this way. I started understanding I needed to do more of this, but again, if this hip is already hiked up, it gets very hard to do. So I can even feel this hip, they're just not aligned. And that's why, again, I'm kind of working on ways to fix this. Once you kind of understand that the body kind of systematically starts to tighten up over time, and it's not led strictly by just muscles, and it's not as kind of honestly an easy fix as a lot of people would sometimes kind of think it would be. So I got to lengthen all these hamstrings. So the inside became short, the outside became short. I'm doing is kind of rotating into this a little bit. The big thing too what I gotta get is deep glute muscles in here. The best way I can explain it is get that femur sitting out more, like I'm riding a horse, if you will. Now with my left, I got it there for the most part. But for each action, I need an equal and opposite reaction, so I gotta, best way to explain it is kind of shorten the left side a little bit as I lengthen the right. can always see it in the knees too. The knees, I mean, you can kind of see how everybody's knees kind of get slightly pulled in and kind of twisted. So when that happens, you know, you got to think of the muscles. They need to be at a certain angle to fire appropriately, and at a certain length tension relationship. And we all too often know that there's an imbalance in the body, and so all too often we're just throwing exercise at it. We're not understanding that we need to stretch the tissue just as much as we need to kind of strengthen it. But the way that we can also increase strength is by increasing range of motion. So our body can take better angles to that movement pattern that maybe we're trying to achieve. The good thing with, you know, in my opinion, percussion therapy too is, you know, some people who maybe don't like to exercise can also get the benefits and start kind of really getting their just more flexible so they can start moving better. I've done it with kind of numerous clients at this point that are more flexible and can do exercises that or ranges of motion, I should say, that they couldn't before. I just kind of work my way up here to this outside. Because again, I got to lengthen all this. You know, all too often we're getting very inflexible in our big joints, okay? So our shoulders, our hips. And that's where, again, kind of all our issues really arise and start from, is these big areas. The reason the hamstrings come in is because my hips out of place, because my quadriceps come into place, same thing. But you can't lengthen one or fix one without first fixing the other in some capacity. So I got to lengthen here, I got to lengthen here. So, you know, I'll get into a quad stretch, start working the front part too. This is what I didn't, you know, quite understand for years. I was always trying to stretch my quadricep, not realizing that, again, I needed my hip to get back into a better place in order for me to really facilitate stretching this. I try to stretch this every day, various exercises. But again, we got to understand exercise a lot of times, unless we're running it through a big range of motion, is shortened. And, you know, if you think of what happens as we age, what happens? Secondly, we shrink, we lose height, so to speak. And the reason for that, again, is more because our muscles become tighter and tighter and are pulling on us constantly. And we're not realizing how much they are pulling and how much scar tissue is on the body. I was amazed. I thought I would have been, you know, with the amount of time I've dedicated to this and understanding, I thought I would have been banging this out in a short time and kind of been perfect. But I realized it's, you know, it runs a lot deeper than we think it does. But with a combination of this, you know, I do it with my clients, and then they go into a movement pattern, and they're like, oh my God, you know, I can move much better. You know, I don't want to loosen this a ton before then exercising, because I just want to get them to be able to move enough to get a better movement pattern. And then later in the day or after the exercise, that's when you really want to kind of work on lengthening this. The more you work on it, the better. You know, again, this is all adductor. That's the other thing people really don't realize, and I didn't realize it myself included. I'm thinking more kind of vastus medialis running down this inside of the leg. You got to realize the quads swoop over from here and come over. So this whole area here is all adductors. And, you know, all too often, most people are not really having any adductor issue. I started to, and I realized now that was my muscles just really tightening and causing my, you know, lack of balance in my muscles, because I started to gravitate away from certain movement patterns. I wasn't stretching like I should. Mainly, I wasn't stretching the hip. That's the kind of most important thing I realize now, and that's what's going to lead to the back issues. You know, hold or strain back. You know, often I was loosening the quadriceps and the glutes. To fix that, but I was kind of just putting a Band-Aid on the situation. And a lot of times I was getting scar tissue on myself in and around this area, kind of almost like falling my pant band. And I can see now, I can see every little nodule that's back there, and I can realize that every time my back went out, it formed some new scar tissue, it just kind of held there. And then I probably altered my movement a little bit. So every time I kind of messed up my back, it was always on my right side. And I can see now my right glute was just getting so tight that it was pulling my vertebrae, or my S1, S2, out of alignment. And slowly over time, you know, we think that it goes away, and maybe I don't get that injury anymore, and I wasn't, but I was getting injuries now to my lower extremities. And that's kind of what happens. The body just systematically does all these things, and I've been able to track them with my clients and kind of know which one kind of started the whole ball rolling. But we tend to kind of forget about old injuries because they don't bother us anymore. So the more we can start to kind of understand that we got to lengthen everything to start to really do this, and we can start to promote, you know, healthy movement pattern and exercises, the better we're all going to be. Hope you found this helpful. Thank you, and look forward to making the next one.